Minnesota. Tim Walz will not seek re-election as governor, and what a fall from grace this has been for him. You might recall in the spring of 2023, he pushed through several progressive ideas to the state legislature that caught the attention of Barack Obama, who went to Twitter to give his endorsement for the programs, which eventually caught the attention of people like Kamala Harris, who chose him to be her running mate as the vice president. Introduced in Chicago at the convention in August of last year, a debate that was an absolute disaster with J.D. Vance at one point called himself a knucklehead. But after reportedly billions of dollars have been stolen from taxpayers, by way of the state of Minnesota, Tim Walz says he will not seek a third term. What a remarkable 2 years in the national spotlight has been for him, Dana.
And Walz hit Trump in his announcement. He said Donald Trump and his allies in Washington, in St. Paul, and online want to make our state a colder, meaner place. They want to poison our people against each other by attacking our neighbors. And ultimately, they want to take away much of what makes Minnesota the best place in America to raise a family. Now, okay, what else has been happening in this last month? Well, you have the discovery that there has been incredible amounts of fraud, and I think 98% of the people arrested were Somalis who are immigrants there in the state that were taking COVID funds and basically and Medicaid funds and stealing them from the American people under his watch or his lack of watch. And now remember, Kamala Harris chooses him as the vice presidential choice partly because he couldn't conceivably upstage her. She says in her book that she didn't want to go with Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, who because he was Jewish. She actually says this, okay? And then she goes with Tim Walz, and he was a disaster from beginning to end. He also has a lot of confidence in himself, but I think that it was very clear to him after he had some discussions over the weekend that he would lose. He was a drag on the Democratic Party nationally, and the best thing that he could have done for the party, actually, and probably for him and his family, is to take this action today, which is to decide not to run for re-election.
So the initial reporting suggests $1 billion has been stolen. Since then, that number's gone higher.
It's higher.
How high, we don't know where it ends. And there are suggestions that it could be similar in other states. Mary Katharine Ham joins us now with an initial reaction. MK, good morning to you. What do you think? Tim Walz?
Well, I was reliably told that he was a great fraud fighter and that, in fact, the fraud was minimal or not happening. So I'm confused about how it suddenly became a fatal blow to his campaign. And I'm actually not confused because the fact is that the numbers were gigantic. This is perhaps unprecedented amounts of fraud. And he does have to answer for it because he was on watch the entire time. And I think it's unlikely, given the scale, that anyone who had power in the Democratic Party at this time, of which the Somali community that was engaged in this is a core constituency, didn't know about it or at least turn a very blind eye to it. And man, the fall from VP candidate to this is quite spectacular.
You have to wonder what the Minnesota Democrats are thinking, and they might be thinking this. It's reported that he met with Senator Amy Klobuchar over the weekend. And Senator Klobuchar has been trying from Washington, saying back home, you've got to get a handle on all of this. She is considering a run for governor. Perhaps they met and she let him know that he would lose in a primary to her.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think she would be a better choice than Tim Walz. She seems like the kind of person who wouldn't put up with this. But again, I would say anyone who was in power in the state of Minnesota had to know that some of this was going on. Whistleblowers were being very upfront about it. Folks, as you see from New York Times reporting and elsewhere, said basically the 2020 mind virus kept us from pointing out that this was happening because we were afraid because it was happening in marginalized communities, we couldn't stop them without being called racist. That is a total abdication of duty. And she's a senator from that state. So she had duties as well. So although she strikes me as a tough lady who can talk tough about this, there was stuff going on while she was on the watch as well.
Mary Katharine, there's reports that Somali Americans number about 100,000 in Minnesota. And it's our understanding that you can't win a statewide race unless you have their vote. And you just mentioned the accusation of racism. And that's pretty much what the message was out of Minnesota. Anybody who was pointing fingers at what was going on there, you were accused of being a racist. Well, now that cover has been blown.
Right, and some, in fact, who were accused of things either threatened to sue or sued, saying, "Hey, we're being discriminated against because you're noticing the fraud." But the numbers don't lie, and the numbers aren't racist, and the stats matter. And every single dollar that is not stewarded by those who are in charge of these programs is stolen from another Minnesota or federal taxpayer who could have used that dollar for honest means and for something productive instead of fraud. So it's really a catastrophe to have that taken from people who are already struggling, maybe to, I don't know, pay for childcare, and it's going to non-existent childcare.
Also, I mean, it is difficult for any politician. Look, there's a reason I don't run. I don't have the stomach for it. But when you become a national laughingstock, and every meme is about you because you were chosen because you're going to show the Democratic Party that you were the masculine part of the party, there's all of that. But there's one thing deeper on the fraud that I want to point out. Keith Ellison, former congressman, is now the Attorney General of Minnesota. And I've mentioned this a couple of times, but it's been a couple of weeks, so let me just bring it back up. And 10-Minute Drill, the podcast, has a lot more on this. He is on audio tape, leaked audio, personally promising fraudsters that he would pressure the government to continue funding the fraudulent enterprises and promise to shield them from investigation. So the apple is rotten all the way through and into the core. And so do Republicans have a chance? I'm just saying, are you saying there's a chance that Minnesota could finally maybe turn a corner? It's been a difficult one for Republicans for many, many election cycles.
Look, I think even in a blue and purple state, even a very blue state, when you get to this level of abuse of the taxpayer, yes, Republicans can have a moment if they seize it. Ellison is a great example of exactly what you say, Dana, that people had to have known about this while it was happening. And in fact, he was talking to the very people doing it and making promises to them. So that can change voters' minds about where they're willing to swing. Republicans, however, have to put up a person against, whether it's Klobuchar or whomever, who can fight that fight. Lisa DeMuth, I believe, is the head of the Republicans in the House in the state who had declared a long time ago. And then Mike Lindell, I think, is prepared to get in the race or is poised or has announced such. So you have to be careful about who you pick on your side as well to make this competitive.
MK, I'm sure you follow this video over the holidays, this father-son team, McShipley. They were showing up at these daycare centers where there were no kids. And a lot of folks in the media went after them for their reporting, as opposed to asking their own questions as to why you're receiving millions of dollars and had no children to show for it. Last comment on this.
Right. Look, I'm glad it went viral because it brings attention to something that deserves attention. Local reporters had worked on this in the past. Investigators in the Republican Party and elsewhere had worked on this in the past, but it really caught fire, and it should, so that a lot of people know this is happening. And this is a sort of a reflection back on Kamala actually went after in her government capacity in California, a guy who blew the whistle on Planned Parenthood with similar kinds of videos and reporting as an independent journalist. They don't like that stuff when it turns against their party and the people who are bringing in money for them.
All right. Well, Mary Katharine Ham off to a roaring start in 2026. Thank you for joining us on this breaking news as Tim Walz pulls out of the governor's race in Minnesota. Thank you.
MK.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.